Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masachet Bava Kamma. This is our fourth lesson, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 21 through 27. Okay, let's start on Daf 21. We are in the middle of discussing from last week the concept of someone getting benefit while the other party doesn't lose out. In Hebrew, it's called ze nehene v'ze lo chaser. Right? Someone gets benefit, and the other party that's involved is not losing anything. And the Gemara wants to know, does the person who's getting benefit, does he need to pay for that benefit, even though the other person isn't losing out? Right? It's obvious that if the person is losing out, you would have to compensate for the benefit. So the Gemara talks about a person who lives in someone else's courtyard and they don't even know that you're living there. Right? Do you need to pay rent? So the Gemara says, no, you don't have to pay rent. If they don't even know that you're living there, they're not losing out on anything. So you don't have to pay rent. Let's say a person is living in someone else's house and you pay them rent, but it turns out that it's not Ruvain's house who you've been paying, but it's actually Shimon's house. So now, do you pay the first person or the second person? So the Gemara says, obviously you pay the second person, right? Why? Because you were renting it out, and because you're renting it out, it shows that you wanted to get money from this interaction. Therefore, now that you're renting it out, you need to pay, as opposed to in the courtyard where the person didn't know anything about it. The person wasn't renting out the courtyard anyway, so they weren't losing out. So you don't have to pay in that first situation. Interestingly, the Gemara says, well, actually, you're doing the person a favor by living in their courtyard. Why? You're preventing demons from living there, right? If it's an abandoned courtyard, so then the demons will think that it's free for them to roam. And the fact that you're living there, right, you would call it house sitting. I don't know how many demons there are nowadays, but maybe you can call demons something else. I like to call it bacteria, right? Things that grow, things that, break down. The other opinion in the Gemara is that you're actually maintaining the house, right? When you ask someone to house sit for you, they're running the water, they're flushing the toilets. So even if I don't charge you money, there is a benefit to you being in the house for me as well. Again, if a person was making money from a property and then it became neglected, and then a person came and built a house on that property, so then he needs to pay the owner of that property, right? So again, this shows that he is losing out and therefore he has to pay. But if he doesn't lose out, maybe he does not have to pay. Okay, now the Gemara talks about, again, we're in the middle of the discussion about shen and regel, specifically shen, which was, again, the word shen means tooth, and it means damage done through the animal eating while the animal's getting benefit. So we said last week that if an animal ate from the side of the public domain, right, for the thoroughfare, basically it stood in this main street and then it turned its head to the side and ate something from the side. You do need to pay for the damage because it wasn't eating something in the middle of the road. We said that if something is from the middle of the road, the animal, it does not, the owner of the animal does not need to pay for damages. But here, since he's eating from the side, he does need to pay. Or you don't need to pay because it's still considered the main thoroughfare. It's still, right, he didn't stick his head into someone's house. He just stuck his head into somewhere on the side. Again, if the animal left the street and went to the side, so then you do have to pay for damages. And now the Gemara has a case. I brought you a picture from the Art Scroll Gemara. Okay, the animal is where the arrow is, right? Well, let's take a step back. It's important to, if any of you have ever been to a marketplace, like they have here, the shuk, like Machane Yehuda in Jerusalem, or Shuk HaKarmel, right? If you have a shuk, a marketplace, there's a main road where people walk, and along the road on the side are stores, right, or stalls. And you can go into these stalls from the main thoroughfare, and once you go into the stall, it's seen as a private area. So here is the case where the animal is walking. The animal is walking straight, but the store kind of jutted into the main thoroughfare. So the Gemara calls this a corner, right? The store is in the corner. The animal didn't turn the corner. The animal was walking straight and then bumped right into the store and ate from the store. Now it is eating from inside the store, but the entrance is in the main road. So the Gemara says, in this case, you do not pay for damages, even though it was inside of the store, because again, he doesn't even have to turn his head to the side. You can see he can just walk straight and eat straight what's in front of him, and it is in the public domain. Another case is if a person puts fruit in, or food, right, in the Reshut HaRabim, in the main area, like on the street. This is called a bor. Bor means a pit. If you remember from the beginning of our Masechet, we had 4 main categories of damages or damagers. One of them is called a pit, right? Actually a pit, which means something that's dangerous in the road. And right, so again, if someone puts fruit in the middle of the street, that's dangerous. And then the person who put it there is liable, and the animal is exempt if he eats from that fruit, because you shouldn't have put it in the middle of the road. Again, as we said, let's say an animal is in the public domain and turns its head to the side and eats. So again, you only have to pay for what it benefited from, or you actually have to pay for the damage that was done. That's the machloket. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 21. Let's say you have a dog or a goat, and it jumped off the roof, right? Dogs like to jump and goats like to jump. It jumped off a roof, and it broke a vessel that was on the floor. So you have to pay full damages. And the Gemara says, because again, this, even though this is normal behavior, you do have to pay full damages. Let's say, and the Gemara is going to explain this in a minute. Another case is, and we actually saw this last week, a dog takes a biscuit off of the fire, right there, like coals. The biscuit is on the coals, and it takes the biscuit to a pile of grain, and the dog is eating this biscuit over the grain, and the coal that was stuck at the bottom of the cookie falls down and burns the grain. So you have to pay full damage for the cookie that it ate, but you only pay half of the damage for the grain. So now the Gemara is going to explain this. Now, we have the goat and the dog falling off the roof and breaking something on the floor. So now the Gemara says, wait, what's the case? If it fell off the roof, you should be exempt. It's an accident, it fell. And we'll see different types of accidents. If it jumped on purpose, so then you have to pay because it jumped on purpose. The Gemara talks about the animal falling off the roof. What if it started off as negligence, right? Meaning that there was some sort of negligence, and then it ended up with an accident. Are you still exempt? or not. So now the Gemara says, well, really, what's the case? Let's say the wall around the roof was rickety. So now there's a negligence there on the roof. And then the goat fell. So that's like an accident. So then you pay damages. The Gemara says this shows that if you start off with negligence and you end off with an accident, you still pay. Or the Gemara says, no, that's not the case. The case is that it was a very narrow, like a very narrow ledge, and the goat shouldn't have been climbing on it in the first place. You should have watched your goat, and that's why you have to pay. Okay. Again, the Gemara says that it's not normal for the goat to jump off of the roof. However, like chickens, as we saw a few weeks ago, it is very common for them to jump up and down. So then you would be liable because you should have watched your chickens, and therefore you would have to pay. Okay, Daf 22, that if the animal jumps abnormally, so then you're exempt. Again, the idea of normal behavior versus abnormal behavior is, could you have anticipated this? If you could have anticipated it, so then you should have watched your animal. If you couldn't have anticipated it, so then you are not responsible to watch them up into this point. So, okay, the next case is about fire, right? A person's, and we'll get more into fire later, not today, another day. But here the Gemara says that a person's fire is like an arrow. What does that mean? It's his force, right? So we think about shooting an arrow, right? The arrow doesn't move on its own. You need to shoot the arrow. As soon as you shoot the arrow, that's seen as an extension of you. So, right, in Hebrew, it's called your koach, right? Your strength, your power. And that's why you're liable. So too with fire, right? If you set something on fire and it goes and lights something else, you are responsible because that's your koach. Or that's not the case, right? So the first opinion is Rabbi Yochanan. He says fire is like an arrow. It's your koach, your responsibility. Rish Lakish says, no, fire is like your property. You're responsible for it. But if the fire goes on its own, so that's not your responsibility. It's not your power that's making it go. It's going on its own. So now the Gemara asks, according to Rish Lakish, why is the person responsible when the dog drops the coal from the biscuit? Meaning, how responsible are you for your pets, right? It isn't the dog's property, right? The dog took the coal, right? Took the biscuit. On the biscuit was a coal. The coal fell. So how could you be responsible for all of that? So the Gemara says, no. The case is that not the biscuit case. The case is that the dog actually picked up a coal and put it on the grain. So then you are responsible because it's your dog and your dog caused the direct damage. Therefore, you need to pay for the damage that was done directly by that coal. And maybe you don't have to pay for the rest of the things that became, that burnt up. Okay, since we're talking about burning and animals, so this is a very famous case. It's actually beautiful that we're coming up to Hanukkah because this is actually a Hanukkah case. So here's the case. A camel, I know you all own camels, so this is good for you. If a camel has some flax on the back of, on his pouch in the back, and he's walking down the street, and it gets, right, it like passes by a fire, and it ignites the flax that's on the back of the camel, and then and the fire was inside the store, but like flax is long, so when it walked by, right, you can even look at her picture, right, when it walks by, it kind of like goes into the store and is ignited, and then it keeps walking, like in a movie, right, it keeps walking and it's burning everything as it walks. Okay, so obviously you are liable, right? You, the candle owner, are liable. However, if the candle was outside the store, so then the store owner is liable, right? You can't leave a burning fire outside of your store. That's not safe. And therefore, the store owner is liable. So then the Gemara adds, however, if it was Hanukkah, right? We all know that on Hanukkah you light outside. So if you lit candles outside, that's a mitzvah. You have to light outside. So then you're exempt. So that's our little Hanukkah daf. Okay. Um, um, now, so here the Gemara says, well, wait a minute, it's the arrow of the camel, but it's not the property of the camel, right? It's not, the camel doesn't own anything. So if the camel ignites everything directly, right? If the camel is setting everything on fire, you're liable because it's your camel that's setting everything on fire. But if it's flat, if the fire just goes by itself, you're not liable. If the camel just stood, right, and it wouldn't move, so then, and then everything burnt down, so then again, you're liable because you tried to move the camel, but it wouldn't move. Okay, let's say a person ignites a stack of grain, right? There's a pile of grain and a person sets it on fire, but he didn't realize that there was a goat tied to this bundle or whatever, a pile of grain. And there was also a slave that was next to this pile. The slave was not tied down. You have to pay for the grain and for the goat because it was tied to it, but you don't have to pay for the slave because the slave could have gotten up and ran away, but it didn't. So you don't have to pay for the slave. Okay. However, if the slave was tied, so now you become, right, so now you burnt down grain, the slave you killed, and the goat you killed also, but the goat wasn't tied down, or maybe it was also tied, but if the slave was tied, now you're liable for murder, right? You murdered a human being. And we have a concept called kimale or kamale b'derabamine, and that basically means that if you are liable for two different punishments, one of them is monetary and one of them is capital punishment, you only get the stringent punishment and you are exempt from the other punishment. So if you're liable for killing a slave and liable to pay for damages, you are only, I guess the word tried, or you're only liable to for the capital punishment case or for the murder case, and you do not have to pay for damages, right? You're not liable to pay for both. Okay, let's say you, speaking of fire, oh, thank you for Zohar prosecuted, thank you. Let's say you give fire to somebody who does not have what we call da'at, does not have cognitive abilities, right? So that is someone who is a deaf mute, someone who is insane, someone who is a minor. So you gave them something that they can't watch because they're not responsible enough. So then, so the Gemara says, really, you're liable, but according to the letter of the law, right, you cannot be prosecuted in court, but God is going to punish you because you shouldn't have done that because it was very dangerous. Okay. Okay, so now Daf 23 tells us that, again, we're trying to determine if the fire is like arrows, meaning your direct power or your direct koach, or is fire seen as your property, something that you needed to guard. So the Gemara tells us that there's a verse that supports Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it's your arrow, it's direct, right? Because it goes out on its own. Okay, right. And how does he prove it? that let's say there's something buried. We've seen this before, and again, we're not talking about fire right now in terms of the Mishnah is not teaching us fire yet, so we don't know all the details. But if something is buried within something else, and that something is set on fire, you're liable for the things that you could see, but you're not liable for the things that were buried underneath. You are exempt. So here the Gemara tells us that if again if the fire damages property, you need to reimburse. You have to pay back that damage. If a fire damages a person, not only do you have to pay back damage, but you have to pay for the 4 things. If you remember, we learned the 4 other things: unemployment and embarrassment and all of those things. Okay, we said that the owner of the dog is liable to pay. But the Gemara says, what about the owner of the coal, right? Shouldn't the owner of the coal have been watching what was happening and not, right? Maybe it should be his responsibility. So we say, no, it's the dog owner that's liable. And this shows that it must have been normal dog behavior. And that's why he is responsible. And we're going to say that the damage happened in the damaged property, right? In a person's private property. We say that, again, this is his property. So now the Gemara says, well, is the animal, again, the dog picked up this biscuit with its mouth and moved it over. So now the Gemara says, is the animal's mouth seen as the domain of the damager, right? The dog owner's property, or is it seen as it's being in the damaged, right? The other person's property, meaning the dog is, right? Let's say the dog went to my neighbor's property, right? So we know that if damage is done in my neighbor's property, I need to pay for it. But what if we say that, wait a minute, the dog's mouth is the dog's property, right? It's the owner's property and not the neighbor's property. So maybe you would not be liable. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, that can't be, because we know that you have to pay for the damage done when an animal eats, right, from your backyard. If he's eating in your backyard, obviously he's eating with his mouth, and we can't say that, oh, no, he's actually eating in his own domain. That's not his own domain, so that doesn't work. So now the Gemara actually creates certain scenarios where damage happens from the mouth of the dog, but outside of the mouth. So it talks about, like, what if a person takes, right? So let's say a person takes the dog's teeth, right, like the mouth, and sicks the dog on you, right? Or it talks about taking the snake to bite another person, but the person does it, not the snake, right? The question is, who's controlling who, right? Is it the dog, the snake doing the damage, or the person, right? If it's the person, so then the person is liable. If it's the animal, so it depends what the damage is done, right? And here the Gemara seems to be saying that a person needs to put a fence around their property, right? I can't leave my property open and say, oh, your dog is not allowed to come into my yard, right? I need to put up a fence. But let's say if it fell down at night, or the owner didn't realize, that's how your dog got into my property. Okay, the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah talks about, if you remember, we've been discussing with aggressive behavior, with Keren. We said that there are 2 types of animals, 2 categories. Tam, which means a regular, calm animal who hasn't shown aggressive behavior, and Muad. Muad means it has proven itself to be an aggressive animal. It needs to have done it 3 times. Once it does it 3 times, that's it. You need to be extremely careful of your animal, and if not, you have to pay full damages. So now the Gemara says, Muad, how does it become Muad? It has to be that there were witnesses that said that it did damage 3 days. And then if it didn't gore for 3 more days, so now it goes back to being a tam, to being, right, that innocent Ferdinand ox, right? So the Mishnah implies that it's fluid. You can go back and forth. So now we said it was 3 days. The next opinion in the Mishnah is that it's 3 times, right? Muad means it gored 3 times. And how does it go back to being tam? If children kind of pull its tail or make funny noises or bother it, and it doesn't gore the children, please do not try this at home. So then it becomes tam, meaning it shows that it's not, it's not aggressive, right? Oh, that reminds me of the Ferdinand book again, right? They try to instigate the ox, and the bull, and it doesn't want to do anything. Okay, so now the Gemara says, again, how do we understand it? Is it 3 times that it has to happen? It doesn't matter in how many days, meaning in one day, if it gores 3 times, it now becomes mu'ad, or does it have to be over the span of 3 days? Okay, and now an interesting aspect of this is it 3 days to make the ox mu'ad, right, seen as aggressive, or are you making the owner like the owner mu'ad, right? Meaning, is it about the ox, or is it about the owner that now needs to control the ox? What's the, as we say, what's the nafkamina? What is the practical application to this? Let's say 3 sets of witnesses all came on the same day to testify that your ox gored 3 times. And even if it happened in 3 days, right? Let's say everyone comes on Thursday, and the first set says, I saw it happen on Sunday. The next one says, I saw it happen on Monday. And the next one comes and says, I saw it happen on Tuesday. So now, if it's about the ox, so the ox gored 3 days in a row or 3 days, so now it's seen as mu'ad. But if it's about the owner didn't know anything about Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. Right now it's Thursday. The owner didn't know anything. So all of a sudden in one day, he hears about 3 times. So we're trying to decide, does that work or not? So the Gemara says that the witnesses need to come and testify in front of the owner and the court. And here the question is, do we see them as a whole group, or do we see them as separate groups? And that's what the Gemara is trying to evaluate, if we see them as one whole group or 3 separate groups that are coming to testify. Let's say a person incites someone else's dog and gets it to attack a 3rd person, right? So Reuben goes to Shimon's dog and yells and makes it like very angry and gets it to bite Levi. So now who is liable, right? So again, it's interesting, right? Because Reuben, who was just, being mean to the dog, he doesn't own the dog, so he doesn't have liability. But the owner of the dog, Shimon, can say, what are you talking about? I didn't do anything. It's not my fault, right? Reuben is the one who did it. So that's one option. Or do we say, no, Shimon should have been watching his dog, and he does have liability, meaning you have to watch your dog and you can't let other people incite your dog. Again, if your dog is dangerous, you should have watched it. Or it's not your fault because you didn't know that this is what your dog was going to do. Okay, let's say next case. Reuven is right being annoying to Shimon's dog, and then the dog bites Reuven, right? The one who is being annoying. So the Gemara says that it's that the owner, Shimon, right, the owner of the dog is exempt because it's not Shimon's fault that Reuven, right, threw rocks at his dog and now the dog got upset. So this way it's Reuven's fault and Shimon doesn't have to pay anything. Okay, we have a case of two cows. It sounds like a joke. Two cows are walking down the street. Okay, so actually one is walking and one is sitting on the floor or crouching. So the one walking kicks the crouching cow. So now that owner is exempt because what's the cow sitting on the floor for, right? He shouldn't have been sitting in the middle of the road. But let's say the crouching cow, not tiger, but the crouching cow kicks the walking cow. So then he's liable. This seems to be saying that it is so we say that he's liable because that he shouldn't have been, that's an aggressive behavior and he shouldn't have done that. Okay, let's go back to oxen who are doing aggressive activities. So the Mishnah says on Daf 24, an ox that gores or pushes or kicks in a public domain, you pay half of the damages. Again, here we're talking about Keren. Keren means aggressive behavior, but a short tam, an ox that has never done this before. So you only pay half because you didn't know he was going to do it. If he does it in somebody else, that was in the public domain. If he does it in the private domain, right, in the neighbor's yard, so now Rabbi Tarfon says you pay full damages because you're now in private domain. The ox shouldn't have been there in the first place. The sages say, no, you still pay half of the damages. Okay, we actually mentioned this last week, so this daf is going to be explaining what we learned last week. Rabbi Tarfon says that there should be a difference between the public domain and the private domain. And therefore, if you're only liable half of the damages in the public domain, you should be bumped up to full damages in the private domain. So he says it's a kal vachomer, right? Kal vachomer means we learn something from, right, something lenient and something more stringent, right? So if there's a case where something is more lenient in the public domain, so when I get to a private domain, it should be more stringent. So all the more so, we would say. That's kal vachomer. Now, okay, Daf 25 is going to be a lot of principles that are general principles of understanding Jewish law. Okay, so one was kal vachomer, right? We learn from one case to understand another case if it's more stringent. Okay, the next principle is the principle of dayo. Dayo means like dayenu, like enough. It would have been enough. So dayo is a principle that limits the kal vachomer. Again, kal vachomer, we're learning from one case to another case, but right, Rabbi Tarfon says, if in the public domain you're only liable half, when you get to the private domain, you should be liable for whole. The sages say, no. We use the principle of dayo. No. You don't bump it up. It stays the same. Half in the public domain, half of the damages in the private domain. So that is the argument, the machloket between Rabbi Tarfon and the sages. So Daf 25 asks, well, wait a minute. How do we know this principle of kal vachomer and dayo? And here the Gemara brings numerous examples where we learn from one case to another. And it shows how even though we learn from one case to another, we don't bump up the severity of the outcome of whatever we're discussing. Rather, we leave it in a limited capacity. So we have that with Miriam, who's sent out of the camp for 7 days when she gets leprosy. So the Gemara says, right, it's obvious that she should be sent out of the camp. She was embarrassed by God or embarrassed God. So the Gemara says, right, if you embarrass your parents, you should be sent out for 7 days. All the more so if it's about God. So maybe it should be double, right? 14 days. And the Gemara says, no, dayo, only 7 days. Another case that's mentioned here is the idea of different utensils or different items that become impure. Now, we know that there are different levels of impurity, right? You can touch a person who is impure because of some sort of emission that the person had or discharge. There's impurity, tum'ah, from a sheretz. A sheretz is like a creepy crawly, right? There are 8 shretzim that give to a tum'ah or impurity, and the highest form is tumat met, right? Becoming impure from a dead body. And here the Gemara wants to determine a reed mat, does it become impure if it touches a dead body or it's exposed to a dead body? And if it does it stay 1 day of impurity like the other 2 lower levels, or does it get bumped up to 7 days of impurity because of the dead body? And here the Gemara brings up another principle, which is that when we learn from one case to another, do we learn it completely, right? And we do like almost copy paste. Whatever the law was here, the law is going to be over here as well. Or do we say, okay, we'll learn one thing from the other, but we still have to keep it within this framework, and therefore we don't transfer all of the details over. So that's called don mina umina, right? Do I learn something from one and also learn all the things that have to do with it? Or do we say we learn from one to the other, but we leave it in its place? So here we said that the reed mat becomes impure. So if the reed mat becomes impure, the Gemara says it becomes impure for 8 days. And then the Gemara says, well, we might not be proving that in all cases you take all of the factors and you move it over, because in this case it's unique, because the Torah tells us anytime something becomes impure when it's exposed to a dead body, it's always going to be 7 days and not 1 day. So now let's go back to our case. Right, Rabbi Tarfon says again that if it's you have to pay half the damages in the public domain. So then you don't pay only half, you pay another half, which makes it full in the private domain. And the sages say, no, we're going to keep it the same, even though it's in the private domain. Okay, Dov 26 tells us that again, for aggressive behavior, for Karen, there's this concept of paying half, but for regular behavior, meaning shen or regal, the other 2 types of damages, you're going to pay full in another person's private property, but you're completely exempt in the public property. So that is the case. Let's go to the next Mishnah on Daf 26. Okay, now we're going to talk about a person. right? A person is always muad, right? Meaning a person is always responsible to watch themselves, and therefore, right, you're fully responsible for any damage that you've done, whether you've done it by accident or on purpose, whether you're awake or asleep, you need to pay for those damages. And if you do damage to a person or you do damage to property, you need to pay full damages, right? There's no such thing as, oh no, it was an accident. I don't have to pay. No, you have to pay. And the Gemara is going to discuss this. Now, the question is, what's considered an accident and when are you seen as liable and when are you exempt? So the Gemara explains, if a person accidentally causes damage of property, so you do still need to pay for that damage. If he damages a person by accident, so you pay for the damage, but not for the 4 other things. Remember, right? Unemployment, medical bills, embarrassment, what else? What am I missing? And pain, right? Sa'ar, pain. That is only, those 4 things are only paid when you do it on purpose, not if you do it by accident. So then the Gemara says, well, if a person is always liable for damage and to pay for pain, even when right, you pay for damages. So here we add also for pain. Okay, so now let's get to a few cases. Let's say a person had a stone on his lap and was unaware of it. Like you didn't realize that this stone was on your lap, and then you stood up. And then this stone caused damage. So now the Gemara goes through all the different liabilities, right? So if it caused damage, you're liable. But we said because it's an accident, you're exempt from the 4 things. You're also exempt if it, let's say, rolls into another domain on Shabbat. So you're exempt. You haven't transgressed the Shabbat because only if you remember in Masechet Shabbat, we talked about what's called Malechet Machshevet. You need to have an intentional act. If it's unintentional, you're not liable for transgressing the Shabbat. Let's say it killed somebody. You cannot go to the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge. That's only if you had some sort of knowledge of what you were doing. And then there's a machloket if you injured a slave. There's a machloket if the slave goes free, right? Do you need actual, again, intent or not? Okay, so that was the case where a person stood up and the stone from his lap fell and he didn't even know it was there. Let's say he knew that the stone was there, but then he forgot. So there was some knowledge, but not full knowledge. So the first 2 things were the same, meaning you're liable for any damage, and you don't pay for the 4 things, because again, that needs to be with intent. You do go to the Ir Miklat, to the city of refuge, because you did have some knowledge, and you're still exempt from Shabbat, because you did not, again, at the time that you did the action, you didn't know what you were doing, and you still have the machloket about the slave. Let's say another case. Let's say a person intended to throw a stone to a moat, but ended up throwing it for a moat, right? I only wanted to do something, but it went double the amount. So you're liable for damage. You're exempt from the 4. You're exempt from Shabbat because again, you didn't have any intent, and you're exempt from the Ir Miklat because again, you didn't have intent on what you were doing. Let's say you intended to throw 4 amot, but now it went 8. Okay, so the same as what we said above about the first 2 things, but for Shabbat, right? Again, you intended to throw 4 amot. If you remember in the laws of Shabbat, 4 amot already makes you liable. So you were already going to be liable, even though it went 8, In 4, you were already liable. So if it landed where you wanted it to land, so then, sorry, if it didn't land, if you didn't care where it landed, so then you are liable because even in the first place, you were going to be liable. If you do care where it landed, so then you are not liable. Okay, let's say you threw a utensil off the roof and it's on its way down, and then a person comes by and knocks the utensil and breaks it, okay, on the way down. So now the Gemara says the second person is exempt from paying for the damages because this thing was going to, in 2 more seconds, it was going to break anyway. But if there were cushions on the ground, right, if it wasn't going to break, so then that second person is the one who's liable because he's the one who broke the object. Okay, number DAF 27. It's a very terrible case, but I'm just going to say I don't think it's meant to be taken literally. But again, I think we're pushing the boundaries of what we've just discussed. But it says that let's say you threw a baby off the roof, and another person kills the baby on the way down. It's a machloket if both are exempt, because both had a hand in killing the child, and since it's both of them, neither of them is liable, or the last one is liable because he's the one who hastened the death. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, let's go back to people and not babies. Okay, a person falls off the roof. Again, I don't know why everyone's near the roof, but okay. A person falls off the roof and, okay, fine. I forgot this case. All right, this is a case where, again, I can pretty much guarantee it's not meant to be taken literally, but it's a very creative case. So this is a little X-rated, but basically a person falls off the roof and inadvertently has intercourse with a woman as he falls on top of her. Again, I don't even bother trying to rationalize, but again, what's going on here? If it was right, a regular wind came by, like not a hurricane, a regular wind came by and he fell off the roof. So then he has to pay for damage and pain and medical expenses and unemployment, but he does not have to pay for embarrassment, for boshet, because it was an accident, right? Because he didn't mean to do this. And in case you were concerned, he does not acquire her as his wife because, again, this was an accident. However, let's say he gets knocked off the roof because it's a strong wind. So then he has to pay for damage, but he doesn't have to pay for anything else because, again, it wasn't his fault. If he intentionally embarrassed the person, right? So let's say, right, he's falling off the roof and he sees a person, he's like, oh, I'll land on that person because it'll soften the blow. So then you have to pay for everything because he intentionally fell on that person. Okay. Okay, let's say a person put a burning coal on top of another person. Again, please do not do any of these things. And then he dies. So the person is actually exempt because the person could have pushed it off. Why didn't the person push it off? But if he burns his clothing, so then he's liable because he has to pay for that damage, because the other person might have thought, oh, I'll just let my clothing burn because then I'm just going to sue him for the money. So because he let it go, now the other person has to pay for damages. But if, let's say, a person put a coal on a person's slave, so then you're exempt because, again, a slave is a person and a person should have knocked it off. But if you put it on a person's ox, and then there was damage, you're liable because it's, again, property. Okay, with that, we finished the second chapter, and we're going to continue to the end of Daf 27. The Mishnah tells us that, let's say you had a large pitcher or a vessel and you left it in the public domain, right, in the middle of the street. And then a person came by and he broke it. So the person is the okay, we'll say, okay, the person is exempt because, meaning the person who broke it is exempt because it shouldn't have been there in the first place. So I don't have to pay you because you left your things in the middle of the street. If the person got hurt, so then the owner is liable for damages. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to begin to explain. So first the Gemara, I didn't say it in the Mishnah, but in the Mishnah, it starts off by talking about a pitcher, a kad, and then it says a chavit, a barrel. So the Gemara says, it started talking about a kad, a pitcher, and then it ended with a chavit, a barrel. Why did it change it? So the Gemara says to teach us that those two words could be interchangeable. Sometimes they mean different things, sometimes they mean the same thing, and this is important to know when you're doing business. Okay, we said that the person who walked by is exempt. Why is the person exempt? Maybe he should have moved to the side and not broken the pitcher. So the Gemara says, no. The whole street is filled with pitchers and he couldn't avoid it. And that's why he's exempt. Or maybe it was dark and he didn't see it and that's why he's exempt. Or because it was at the corner, right? So again, I guess you can take the picture we have here, but go the other way, right? If you're, let's say, walking from the narrow end of our picture and you turn the corner, right? You can't see what's on the floor at the corner because you just turned into it. So if it was there, you're not liable because you didn't see it because it was at the corner. Now, he would be exempt even if he broke it on purpose, because again, as we said, you shouldn't have put it in the main thoroughfare. And we said if he gets hurt, but you broke it on purpose, so now the owner is exempt because you shouldn't have kicked the barrel in the first place. Okay, we say anytime it's in the middle of the street, you're exempt if you break it, or maybe we should say that you should have looked where you were going, and therefore you are liable. So the Gemara says it depends on the case. Right, the Gemara gives an example of an oil press that was at the corner. Again, going back to our picture, right? If you're coming from the other side, from the right side, and there's an oil press at the corner. Now, an oil press, you bring a lot of vessels of oil to be pressed, and people are allowed to leave, all their, we would call it maybe all the shopping carts, right, are on the street. Because you're waiting in line. So then you should have been more careful. You knew that there's an oil press at the corner, so you need to be careful. And if you knock into things and break them, you are liable. Okay, from here, the Gemara talks about how much you need to pay for embarrassment, depending how a person hit you or where they hit you. And from there, the Gemara talks about, are you allowed to take the law into your own hands? Are you able to, right, if you see an injustice, and if the law is clear that this person is being unjust, and it's going to take a long time to take the person to court, maybe you can just punch the guy in the face and do what you need to do, or no, there's a process. You have to take them to court, you have to bring witnesses, and you can't do whatever you want. So the Gemara gives a case of a person who owes you something, or maybe took something from you and you want it back. So the Gemara says you shouldn't sneak into their property and take your thing. Rather, you should knock on the door, you punch him, and you take it back, right? Not in a backwards way, but in a confrontational way. And the Gemara says, or maybe when it says punch him, really it means take him to court, right? You can't just go around punching people. You can take them to court, and that's how you resolve matters. So we are going to see how we resolve this case next week. I will be traveling next week, so class is actually going to be on Sunday night, same time, but it will be on Sunday. So I will send out an email on Friday to remind you, but you can write it down, as I see Eliza's doing right now. So if you can write it down, that would be great. Okay, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and we'll have another class before Hanukkah, so I don't have to say Hanukkah Sameach, but wishing everyone a wonderful week, a wonderful Shabbat, and we should just hear good news.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you.